Merry meet. There was a time when magic was not any kind of a secret, not a rebellion, not a thing to be hidden in shadows or whispered behind closed doors. It was breath, it was bread, it was the way the sun moved across the floorboards. It was the way the grandmother stirred the pot 3 times clockwise and muttered a blessing under her breath. It was the way a child placed stones in a circle and knew, without being told, that this was a sacred act. Magic was not separated from life, it was life. In the old ways, magic was not a performance, it was not a spectacle. It was not reserved for moonlit ceremonies or dramatic incantations. It was the way the herbs were hung to dry, the way the bread was marked with a cross or a spiral before baking. It was the way water was poured with intention, the way names were spoken in the wind. It was the rhythm of survival, of connection, and of reverence. To live was a practice of magic. To tend the hearth was to tend the spirit. To walk the land was to listen to its voice. There was no division between sacred and mundane. The sacred was the mundane. The hearth was the center of the home, not just for warmth, but for worship as well. It was the altar of the ancestors, the place where offerings were made, not with ceremony, but with care. A pinch of salt thrown into the fire to ward off illness, a whisper to the flames to carry a prayer, ashes saved to mark thresholds and protect the young. The hearth was where stories were told, where spells were spoken in the form of lullabies, where healing was passed down in recipes and rituals disguised as routine. The old magic lived in the hearth, and when the hearth was lost, we forgot how to listen. The old ways were rooted in the land, in the cycles of the moon and the turning of the seasons, in the migration of birds and the blooming of herbs. People knew when to plant by watching the stars. They knew when to harvest by listening to the wind. They knew which plants to use, not from books, but from the whispers of their grandmothers and the dreams of their ancestors. The land was not a resource, it was a relative, a teacher, a spirit. To walk barefoot on the earth was to pray. To gather herbs was to commune. To bury the dead was to return them to the womb of the world. Magic was not learned, it was just simply remembered. In the old ways, the ancestors were not gone. They were present in the smoke, in the stones, in the stories. People spoke to them daily, not with seance or spectacle, but with quiet reverence. A candle lit in the morning, a plate set aside at dinner, a name spoken during the storms. The ancestors were consulted for decisions, for healing, for protection. They were not feared, they were family, and their wisdom was not locked in books, but carried in bones. A broom was not just for sweeping. It was for clearing energy, for marking sacred space, for protecting thresholds. A mirror was not just for vanity, it was for divination, for reflection, for seeing what lies beneath. A needle and thread were not just for mending clothes, they were for stitching spells, for binding intentions, for weaving protection. Every object had a spirit, Every action had a meaning. To live was to cast spells, to speak was to invoke, and to clean was to cleanse. Magic was not something you did, it was something that you were. The word witch was not always feared. It once meant wise one, healer, midwife, keeper of the old ways, who remembered, who listened. The village witch was the one who knew. She knew which herbs to use for fever, which words to speak for protection, which symbols to draw for safe passage. She was not separate from the community, she was its heart. And though she was later hunted, burned, silenced, her magic never died. It went underground, into kitchens, into lullabies, into the hands of those who still remembered. Today we live in a world that has forgotten, that calls magic superstition, that calls ritual delusion, that calls connection madness. But the old ways are still here, in the soil, in the bones, and in the breath. They wait for us to remember, to reclaim, to reweave, to stir the pot with intention, to light the candle with purpose, to speak the name with reverence. You do not need permission. You do not need perfection. You need only to listen to the wind, to the water, to the whisper in your blood. To walk the old path is not to escape the modern world. It is to root yourself in something deeper, to remember that magic is not a trend, not a costume, and not a performance. It is the way you speak to your ancestors, the way you honor your body, the way you protect your community. It is the way you reclaim what was stolen, the way you transform what was broken, the way you rise with the strength of those who came before. So light the candle, stir the pot, sweep the floor, and know you are practicing the old magic. You are living the old ways. You are the spell. Blessed be.